The man who trained me wore the same work jacket every day for the 4 years I knew him, and it had already been old when I arrived. Not old in the way a thing is old when somebody's being sentimental about it. Old in the sense that the indigo had gone from navy to a pale, chalky blue at the shoulders, that the elbows had been rebuilt twice with visible stitching, and that the collar had been turned at some point by somebody who knew how to turn a collar. It was in constant daily use. It was not a costume. It was simply his jacket, and it was going to keep being his jacket. I asked him once how old it was, and he had to think about it, which told me more than the answer did. I spent 4 years in Japan, learning a trade and living in an ordinary household in an ordinary town. Nothing about that house was luxurious, but almost every piece of clothing in it was older than the equivalent piece in my own wardrobe back home, and in visibly better condition, and none of it was expensive. That combination bothered me for a long time, because it should not be possible. Cheaper clothes, older clothes, better condition. Pick two. It took me most of the first year to work out that the clothes were not different. What was different was everything that happened to the clothes between wearing them and wearing them again. There are 9 things in this video. None of them require you to buy anything. Several of them require you to stop doing something you are currently doing, which is harder but also free. I will tell you plainly which ones are worth adopting and which ones are only worth knowing about, because a couple of these are genuinely inconvenient, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. Number 1. They wash clothes far less than you do. This is the foundation, and everything else sits on top of it. In that house, a shirt worn for a day of ordinary indoor activity did not automatically go in the wash. It went on a hanger, in the air, overnight, and it was worn again. Underwear and socks were washed every time. Everything else was washed when it was actually dirty. American laundry habits are built on a different assumption, which is that worn equals dirty. One wear, one wash, into the machine, no judgment required. It is a system that removes a small daily decision, and the cost of removing that decision is enormous. Because the washing machine is where clothes die. Not the wearing, the washing. The agitation breaks fibers, the heat shrinks and sets stains. The detergent strips finishes, and the tumble dryer finishes what the machine started. A garment worn 50 times and washed 5 times is in dramatically better condition than the identical garment worn 50 times and washed 50 times. The lint in your dryer filter is your clothes. That is what it is. It is not dust from the air. It is fiber that used to be part of the things you own, removed a little at a time, load after load, until the fabric is thin and the color has gone flat and you decide the shirt is old. The shirt is not old. It has been washed 140 times. There is a second-order effect of washing less that took me a long time to notice, and it is the reason the habit sticks once it starts. When a shirt is not automatically headed for the machine, you look at it. You check the collar, you check under the arms, you decide. And in checking it, you notice the loose button and the small tear at the seam. Weeks before either becomes a real problem. The one-wear, one-wash system removes that inspection entirely. Clothes go from your body into a basket without ever being looked at, come out of a machine, get folded, and go into a drawer. Nobody examines anything. The first time you properly look at a garment is the day it fails. So washing less is not only gentler on the fabric, it is the thing that puts your eyes on your own clothes once a day, which is where every other habit on this list starts. Number 2. They air clothes instead. This is the habit that makes the first one possible, and it is the one I would move to the top of the list, if you only take one thing from this video. At the end of the day, the clothes come off and go somewhere with moving air. A hanger by an open window, a rail on the balcony, a hook where a draft passes. Not folded into a drawer, not dropped on a chair, not put back into a packed wardrobe, out in the air overnight. What that does is straightforward. Most of what makes clothing smell is bacteria feeding on sweat in a damp environment. Remove the damp and the process stops. 12 hours of moving air over a shirt gets the moisture out. And by morning, the shirt smells of nothing, which is the actual goal. The chair pile does the opposite. Clothes in a heap stay damp against each other, which is exactly the condition the bacteria need, which is why the shirt that seemed fine when you took it off smells wrong the next morning and goes in the wash. So the chair is not a laziness problem. It is a ventilation problem, and it costs you a wash cycle every time. Number 3, the washing that does happen is cold and gentle. When something is genuinely dirty and does go in the machine, almost nothing about the cycle resembles the American default. The water is cold. Not warm, not hot. Cold, which in most Japanese homes is simply what comes out of the tap, because a great many washing machines there have only a cold inlet. There is no hot option to choose. That single constraint protects clothing enormously. Heat is what sets protein stains permanently, shrinks natural fibers, fades dye, and degrades elastic. Modern detergent works perfectly well in cold water. The hot wash is a habit inherited from an era of worse detergent, and almost nobody has updated it. The cycle is also short, and the machine is small. A smaller drum means less distance for garments to tumble and less mechanical stress. A shorter cycle means fewer minutes of agitation. And the load is genuinely sorted, not sorted in theory. Heavy things with heavy things, light things with light things, because a pair of jeans in with shirts spends 30 minutes beating those shirts against the drum. Worth adopting, all of it, immediately. Cold water alone will visibly change how long your clothes hold their color, and it costs nothing. It saves money, in fact, because heating the water is most of what a wash cycle spends. One more thing about cold water, because there is a specific failure that makes people abandon it and then blame the water. Cold washing fails on grease. Cooking oil, butter, the mark from a takeaway container, those need heat or a pre-treatment. And if you cold wash a greasy stain, it will sit there and look like the cold water does not work. The Japanese answer is not a hotter wash. It is dealing with that one item separately, by hand, at the sink, with a bar of soap directly on the mark before it goes anywhere near the machine. 30 seconds, one garment, at the point where the stain happened. That is worth stealing on its own, because the American alternative, turning the whole machine up to hot for one greasy shirt, punishes every other garment in the drum for something one of them did. Number 4, nothing goes in a dryer. I have talked before about Japanese homes not having a tumble dryer. In the context of clothing lifespan, this is not a minor absence. It is probably the single largest factor. A dryer does 3 things to a garment at once. It heats it, which degrades elastic and shrinks fibers. It tumbles it, which abrades the surface. And it does both simultaneously for 40 minutes, which is why the lint trap fills up. Line drying does none of that. The garment hangs still at air temperature, and the only stress on it is its own weight. Now, the honest part. Line drying is slower, and it is genuinely worse in some conditions. In a humid Japanese summer, indoor drying can take a full day, and things can end up smelling of the room. That is a real problem there, and people talk about it constantly. It is not a paradise. But the gap between a line-dried wardrobe and a tumble-dried one after 3 years is not subtle, and you do not have to go all the way. Line dry the things you care about and the things with elastic in them. The knitwear, the good shirts, the sportswear, anything with stretch. Tumble the towels and the bedsheets, which do not much care. That split gets you most of the benefit, with almost none of the inconvenience. Number 5. The hanging is done deliberately, and there is a shape to it. Clothes on a Japanese balcony are not just hung up. They are hung in a specific arrangement, and once you see the reasoning, it is hard to go back to doing it randomly. Long items go on the outside, short items in the middle. That creates an arch shape with an open space underneath, and air moves through that space rather than stalling. A flat wall of laundry all the same length dries from the outside in and stays damp in the core for hours longer. Items are spaced with a gap, not crowded. Shirts are hung on a hanger, not folded over the line, because a fold over a line puts a horizontal crease across the garment that then needs ironing and stresses the fibers at the fold. Trousers are hung inside out from the waistband, so the thick waistband and pockets, the slowest part to dry, get the most air. And knitwear does not hang at all. It goes flat because a wet jumper hanging from its shoulders will grow several centimeters and never fully recover. None of that costs anything. It is just knowing the order. There is a variation on the hanging that I dismissed as superstition for about a year and then found out was correct. Colored items are dried out of direct sun or turned inside out if they cannot be. Whites go in the sun deliberately. The reason is that sunlight bleaches. That is genuinely useful on a white shirt. It lifts residual yellowing at no cost and does it better than most products. And genuinely destructive on anything dyed. Indigo, black cotton, and anything red will visibly fade across a summer of sunny afternoons on a line. So the same balcony is used 2 different ways depending on what is hanging on it. And the whole intervention is turning a shirt inside out before you peg it. It takes 2 seconds, and it is the difference between a black t-shirt that stays black for 4 years and one that goes gray in 1. Number 6. Things are mended early and visibly. The mending tradition in Japan gets romanticized heavily in the West, and I want to strip that back a bit, because the romance is not the useful part. In the house I lived in, mending was not a craft evening. It was maintenance, done early on small problems. A seam starting to open got closed that week. A thin patch at an elbow got reinforced before it became a hole. A loose button got sewn back on the day it went loose, not put in a bowl on the counter to be dealt with later. The word people know for this is sashiko. Running stitch reinforcement, usually visible, sometimes decorative. It is real and it is genuinely beautiful. And it is also mostly used now for aesthetic purposes on denim by people who like the look. What matters is not the stitch. It is the timing. A small hole is a 5-minute job. The same hole 2 months later is a patch. The same patch 6 months later is a bin decision. The entire economics of mending depend on catching it in the first window, and the first window is short. The reason this works in a Japanese house and not in an American one is not skill. It is that the needle and thread are in a drawer in the room where people sit, rather than in a box in a cupboard in the spare room. Proximity is doing the work. If you take one action from this section, it is that. Put a needle, black thread, white thread, and a few buttons in the room where you actually sit in the evening. That is it. The mending follows on its own, because the cost of doing it drops below the cost of thinking about it. Number 7. Shoes are rotated, never worn 2 days running. This one surprised me, and it is the highest return habit on the list per unit of effort, because the effort is 0. Nobody in that house wore the same pair of shoes 2 days in a row. There were 3 or 4 pairs by the door in rotation, and a pair that came off in the evening did not go back on the next morning. The reason is moisture. A foot puts out a startling amount of it in a day, and the inside of a shoe absorbs almost all of it. A shoe worn on consecutive days never fully dries. It stays slightly damp permanently, which destroys the lining, breaks down the glue, degrades the leather from the inside, and grows the bacteria that make it smell. A shoe given a full day off dries completely, and its life roughly doubles. Not improves, doubles. 2 pairs in alternation will outlast 4 pairs worn to death one after another. And you will have spent less money and had drier feet the whole time. Cedar shoe trees, which exist in the West and get treated as a fussy luxury for expensive shoes, are doing exactly this job. Pulling moisture out and holding the shape while it happens. They are not a luxury item. They are a dehumidifier that costs $10. There is a second thing about the shoes that is worth 30 seconds, because it is doing almost as much work as the rotation. Shoes come off at the door, and they come off properly, heel held, not levered off with the other foot. Then they go on a rack with air around them, not into a sealed cupboard and not into a shoebox. Levering a shoe off with the opposite toe crushes the heel counter, which is the stiff cup at the back that holds the shoe's shape. Once that collapses, the shoe never fits properly again, and it is the most common way a good pair gets ruined by someone who has done nothing else wrong. And the sealed cupboard is where the moisture you were trying to release gets held against the shoe all night. An open rack in moving air finishes the job the rest day started. Number 8. Clothes are stored by season and stored properly. Twice a year, that house changed over. The summer clothes came out and the winter clothes went away, and the reverse in autumn. This is a normal practice in Japan, and it has a name. And the obvious reason for it is storage space. A small house cannot hold a full year of clothing in the accessible wardrobe. But the second reason is the one that matters for lifespan. Storing clothes for 6 months forces you to handle every single garment twice a year. You touch it, you look at it, you decide where it goes. And in doing that, you notice things. The moth hole, the stain that did not come out, the thing you did not wear once all summer. A wardrobe you never fully empty accumulates damage invisibly. Something can be quietly destroyed by moths over 2 years in the back of a closet, and you find out when you finally reach for it. The storage itself matters too. Things go away clean, because a stain left for 6 months sets permanently, and because moths are attracted to the residue of skin and food, not to clean fabric. Things go away dry. Things go into a container with a desiccant, not a sealed plastic bag, because sealed plastic traps whatever moisture was already inside. And knitwear goes away folded, never hanging, because 6 months on a hanger will pull the shoulders out of shape permanently. There is one more storage detail that has nothing to do with clothes lasting, and everything to do with whether you enjoy owning them. Everything going away for 6 months means everything coming back after 6 months. And coming back is a genuinely good experience. You unpack a box of clothes you have not seen since spring, and half of it feels almost new, because you have not looked at it in half a year. A wardrobe holding all 4 seasons at once never gives you that. Everything is permanently visible, permanently familiar, and permanently slightly boring, which is a large part of why people buy clothes they do not need. So the changeover is doing something a bit unexpected. It is manufacturing novelty out of things you already own, twice a year for free, which is the cheapest possible substitute for shopping. Number 9. The wardrobe is small on purpose, and that is what makes the rest of it possible. This is the one that ties everything together, and it is the reason all 8 previous habits are sustainable rather than exhausting. You cannot air, rotate, mend, and seasonally store 60 garments. It is too much work and you will not do it. The whole system collapses under volume. With 20 garments, all of it is trivial. Airing is 1 rail. The seasonal changeover is an hour. Mending is rare, because each garment is chosen and therefore worth mending. There is also an effect on how you treat things that is easy to underestimate. When you own 5 shirts, you know all 5. You know which one has the loose button and which one cannot go in a hot wash. When you own 25, you know none of them, and you treat the whole set as interchangeable, which means you treat all of them as disposable. So the small wardrobe is not primarily about minimalism as an aesthetic. It is the operating condition for everything else on this list. There is a test for whether you actually own the right number of things, and it is not a count. Take everything out and put it back 1 item at a time, and stop when the rail is comfortably full rather than packed. Whatever is left over is the part of your wardrobe you have been storing rather than wearing. A packed rail is not a full wardrobe. It is a wardrobe that creases everything in it, hides half of what you own behind the other half, and stops air moving between garments, which is 3 separate problems caused by 1 avoidable thing. Now, the part I owe you, because I have been describing this as a system, and systems have costs. The first honest thing is that some of this is a consequence of constraint rather than wisdom. Japanese homes are small, Japanese laundry machines are cold only, and Japanese balconies exist, and American ones often do not. People are not doing this because they worked out the optimum. They are doing it because the house makes it the path of least resistance. And the good outcome is partly a happy accident. That matters when you copy it. You are copying it against resistance, without the house pushing you, which means the habits that survive for you will be the ones that are genuinely easy. The second honest thing is that line drying in an apartment with no balcony and no airflow is miserable and can produce a smell that is worse than anything a dryer does. If that is your situation, do not force it. Do the cold wash, do the airing, do the shoe rotation, and let the dryer handle the rest. The third is that the mending romance is oversold. Nobody I lived with found mending soulful. It was a small chore done promptly because doing it late was worse. Most of the aesthetic writing about it in English was produced by people who do not have to do it. And the fourth is that clothes lasting 20 years only saves you money if you would otherwise have replaced them, and only saves you money if you still want them. A garment that survives 2 decades and spends 19 of them unworn has not saved anybody anything. So here is the whole thing compressed. Wash less, air more. Cold water. Skip the dryer for anything with stretch. Hang long on the outside and short in the middle. Keep the needle in the room where you sit. Never wear the same shoes twice in a row. Handle everything twice a year. And own fewer things, so that all of the above takes 10 minutes a week instead of an evening. If you do exactly 1 of them, do the shoes. It takes no time, it costs nothing. It doubles the life of the most expensive things you wear, and you will notice within a month. And if you do 2, add the airing rail. Between them, those 2 habits will change more about how long your things last than any purchase you could make. If this was useful, there is a video on this channel about the 10 things Japanese homes do not have. And the clothes dryer is on that list for exactly the reasons I have just gone through. Watch that one next.